Okay. The first item of business is to take care of personnel, and I can take a motion to approve B1 through 11.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion, questions?
I'm going to abstain on 11 because I am acquaintance to one person, and I also feel bad about someone being riffed twice, so I'm going to abstain on that one. I've had that happen to me as well. So
Okay,
I'm going to abstain on that. I'm going to abstain on this one.
we got it for the record. Okay. Anything else? Mr. Gaynor?
Mr. Bosch? Don't you, from a procedural standpoint, have to separate 1 through 10 and then do 11 and then do 12?
I assumed you were abstaining from the full motion, correct?
Is it we're doing,
1
Well,
through
Well,
11.
we
1
could-
through 11,
yeah,
so do you-
oh,
We
I'm
could,
s-
do you, we
You
could
can- you
take
do
it,
one
we
through-
could take it separate.
please.
So
We
we
could-
can table this motion.
So, procedurally, we tabled, we have to,
You have to modify, we need
We-
a motion to modify.
we have to modify the motion, I think.
All right.
So I'll accept the motion to modify the previous motion.
So moved.
second. I'm sorry, I thought, I misread what 11 and 12 were, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, do we have to take a vote on modifying the motion, right?
Correct.
And the modification is to exclude B11 from the previous motion. So, any discussion? No discussion. Mr. Gaynor, what you
Mr.
call?
Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Abstain.
No, you're
You can
I'm
vote
voting
to modify.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Plus, we're late, that's already, it's past my
Yeah,
bedtime.
Mr. Posh? Yes. Now,
Now we have to actually
Okay.
vote on the original motion. So, any discussion? Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll?
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Now I abstain.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Okay. I'll accept a motion to approve B11.
So moved.
You're abstaining from this one.
You- That's the one you wanted to
I can make the motion. I can,
Second.
oh, wait, I'm totally just confused.
Well, you need some clarifications of what just happened?
I think I voted for the thing I didn't want to vote for, so.
Yeah, you abstained.
I abstained
Yeah,
from
you abstained for what you didn't want to abstain for. But we got you on record.
So I should abstain on 11.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
according to what you were trying to accomplish, yes.
Okay. So then I abstain.
The vote hasn't been
Hey.
called.
I'm trying to read two things at once, I'm sorry.
Okay, I got a motion and a second.
Got it.
Okay, Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll?
Mr. Silverman?
Abstain.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes. I'll accept a motion for B12, which is in the hands of the board members only. It's a resolution acting on a recommendation to non-renew a contract by the superintendent. I'll accept a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, Mr. Gaines, would you call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Okay, that gets us, we can take all of these, B1 through 4, I think. The 5 has to be separate, right?
Take them all separate?
We got to take them all, that's what I
All
was,
separate.
okay, so I'll accept the motion to approve B1, which is, oh, I'm sorry, C1, which is a recommendation to approve the facade for Rocks L.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Questions?
Yeah, can you just sort of go over, I mean, these are 5 items that,
Well,
Yeah,
we
love to
probably
have-
need them to sit up here if we're gonna ask them.
And I apologize, I was on vacation for 2 weeks, and this eluded me when it was time to get on the last board meeting. The facade is
Ju-
Rock paper.
You need the mic.
Excuse me. Better? The facade is part of the study that we had accomplished 3 years ago of all the district buildings, and Rock's Elementary was at the top of that list. We took bids, and the bids actually came in very well. The estimate was $700,000 to do the entire facade, and we ended up with $540,000.
What does this work entail?
The entire perimeter of Rock's Elementary, the tuck pointing.
So it's basically tuck pointing, it's, I guess the question would be, this is for building envelope, retain, keep water out of the building, things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
The only thing that, and again, we had, this was in phases originally. If you remember going back, we had
Yeah.
Phase 1, which I think was the east and west elevations, and then I deferred that. We determined to go out to bid just because of the condition. There's points of the building you can stick your fingers in through some of the joints, and it is the worst of all our schools. So I felt it necessary to go out, and with the bids were so favorable, we just can't pass up on it.
Well, this was, if memory serves, this was almost, I think it was like $500,000 over a 3-year span. So is this the same as that $500,000 over 3 years, or is it?
No, this was two separate, it was $300 and some thousand for the first estimate, and then the next estimate was similar. So again, the estimate was $699,000
Okay.
and some change. So we did receive some competitive bidding.
But this is also, we don't have any, right now, it's not like there's a brick that's going to fall out and hit a kid. I mean, we're not.
No, we
haven't reached that point, but
No.
if we don't, that's a
This will
possibility.
happen, right?
Okay.
This also includes the two chimneys at Noble and Oxford, where we have some serious needs.
Can you just roughly, just sort of from a percentage perspective, share the amount of work that's going to Roxborough versus Oxford and Noble?
It'd be 95% is going to Roxelle.
Okay.
Again, these are just at those two schools. We had originally contemplated breaking those separate, but we knew we could get better results by including it with the same contractor.
And I know you've shared with us in the past that this was part of the plan.
Oh, yes, it is. That plan has not changed, except for the deferring. I mean, again, we're trying to catch up.
And just to clarify your answer of 95%, again, that's just because the need, there's 95, it's not any favoritism.
No,
the
it's just the
need.
square footage of the amount of work that's being done on the chimneys compared to the entire building at
And
Ross
as you said,
Elementary
that
School.
is the building in greatest need in this
Yes.
area, in the
Right.
entire district. Thank you.
And this is permanent improvement money?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Gainer, would you call the roll?
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
You're welcome.
I'll accept the motion to approve C2.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
This is Phase, this is where when I'm on Phase 2, the Roxborough Elementary School playground. We had Phase 1 was completed last year. This is Phase 2. We had a committee that was managed by the principal, Mr. Jenkins, the architect, and community members and teachers. And from that, I can share this with you.
It was always planned to be two, it was always planned to be 2 phases.
Yes, sir. There you go.
It's fine.
We decided to accept the alternates because they were, this project originated, whenever the group got together, the estimate was on $200,000. So with some numerous meetings and input from the group that was involved, they pared it down to below $100,000, which was our original budget. And the items that we put as alternates came in reasonable, so we decided to take the group of alternates.
So
This
option
completes,
2,
this completes what we planned for Roxborough Elementary School.
so option 2 is what we're approving,
Yes.
or it's a combination?
It's a combination. This is the whole This is an overview that I put together from the architect. I'll email you some color renditions of what actually is going in the ground.
Oh, that's not necessary.
I would like to see those.
I'll send it.
because it's-
Well, it's not
I
necessary
mean,
for me.
for this vote,
Sure.
for me, it's not necessary.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh,
Are you?
nah, it's not.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Oh,
don't,
are we doing questions? Okay.
we are.
Okay. On the Roxborough logjam, I'm assuming this is not pressure-treated wood, because I know that's always been a, well, I guess because I'm assuming this is actual real wood, not plastic.
Yes.
Then the question I would pose is, if there's no preservatives in it, what is the expected lifespan of this?
That's a very good question. I'll have to find out and get back with you. I'd be guessing.
Okay.
I'm not aware of that.
And I'm assuming the rock wall is not an actual rock, it's probably some
It's
sort of...
those fabricated
Okay.
ones.
And then the lily pad symbols, the neighbors are happy about this?
This is in addition to the existing musical ensemble that's there. So if they're not happy now, they won't be happy with that addition,
Okay.
to be honest with you.
Well, I just, and then the same, I was in the same with the log steppers is actually real wood.
Yes.
Okay, so then I guess the same question would go as far as what we expect the lifespan
And
of it to be.
I'll
Okay.
get that information.
And I like the Canterbury sign sharp.
That's next.
Oh,
is,
I didn't know.
is
Okay.
there anything in the phase 2 of the Roxborough Elementary Playground where a child would get spun really quickly on?
No.
So, in this situation, we'd have the rock wall as well as the tire swing.
Yes,
We'd
sir.
have both. Okay.
I'm very, very happy. I've heard that the administration and the principal and the community and parents really work together to put. the
Mr.
levels
Jenkins
together.
has been phenomenal. He's headed up the entire, all the meetings, so he's,
Pleased with how that process went.
Anything else? Mr. Gainer, would you call the roll?
Mr. Bosch?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Okay, I'll accept the motion to approve C3, improvements at Canterbury Monumental Sign.
So moved.
Second.
the principal had requested some signage. Dr. Dixon asked that I investigate that. We had 3 different renditions, price-wise, that were returned to us by Studio Techni, is who we retained to do that work. And we went with the middle sign, which you see there. It'll be illuminated from the ground at it, and it announces the building. It matches the building facade.
Questions?
We, in sort of old Heights fashion, we've sort of let each building have their own autonomy in terms of picking signage. Is that correct? Because I see someone say, there's not a consistency. It more goes with what the building chooses. Is that correct?
In the past, that has been that way. At this point, what I did is I went to the architect and just asked him for something that complemented the building. Then that was vetted through the principal and through Dr. Dixon. We selected the one, and like I said, in the middle. The other 2 were, the one least expensive, looked cheap, and it wouldn't have complemented the building. The other one was just more money than we would want to spend to place a sign out front. So in this case, no, we didn't leave it. In the past, you're right, I think at Rock's Middle, we allowed the building, hey, what do you like? They showed us something, and we said, sure, let's do it. But we wanted to control the process here a little bit more. The principal had input.
But, and I don't personally, just so that my question isn't misinterpreted, I have no need for all the signs to have every school to look similar or the same. I think as long as they're done tastefully, then,
Right.
that just so we're not surprised. Okay, thanks.
So, regrettably, every time you put a sign in, it's almost like a magnet that a car's gonna hit it.
That's up off the drive a little.
I
They're
know,
really
the
going to
line-
have to come up over the
No.
curb.
But it just seems like every place you put a sign, that's where someone drives up on the road and hits it. I mean, you're far enough away, you'd have to go way up over the sidewalk.
They'll regret hitting this one.
But you don't.
You look at the other schools, they're made of like aluminum, light aluminum. This one is going to be solid.
Like,
And
kick me.
if that would occur, if someone had jumped the curb and hit the sign, our insurance would cover the
Well, their
expense.
insurance
Oh,
will
right,
cover
right.
it.
You have a camera on it and get their license number.
Exactly.
Which you approved cameras previous week, so
There you
we
go.
will have cameras in.
We approved that for some reason.
Okay, anything else? Mr. Gaynor?
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Okay, I'll accept a motion to approve C4, which is a contract agreement with Wren Hill Group for alternative staffing,
So moved.
or substitute staffing, I should say.
Second?
Okay, any discussion? This is basically renewal.
Renewal.
Any questions? Mr. Gaynor?
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Zucker?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes. Okay, I'll accept a motion for, to approve C5 with Turner Construction for guaranteed maximum price for amendment number 1.
So moved.
Second. Okay. Any discussion or questions?
So our budget initially was around 500,000 for this, is that, if I recall correct?
I think so.
And
Right.
it came in for I think at last in the pack, it was like 3-something in the packet, 370. There was some issue at one point about, after the removal of the trailers, of us, putting the space back to sort of the condition that it was. Is this too early for that process to take place? Would that happen after the middle schools, or the trailers that are getting removed, will they be, again, I guess, or at least graded nicely or sodded or something, or how does that?
This is taking the existing pylons down 6 to 10 inches below the grade, and it gives us enough surface to get grass to grow. And when we remove the other 2 in 2 years, we'll have to assess what is actually happening on that site. What do we need, what are we going to put back in its place?
Okay.
What
If
is-
grass is growing and it looks great, we may leave it right where it's at.
What is the total scope, I mean, aside from taking the 2 modulars out and reducing the foundations, what else is the work including?
You're actually going to get a presentation by me tomorrow night at the joint council meeting, but the only other thing it really includes is the widening of the traffic lanes so the buses can come through and drop students off. We're taking out the 2 ends, taking out the curbs at both sides, and widening the lane.
Is there a reason, I guess the question would be, is there a reason not to, why not just, if the 2 modulars are on the ends, correct?
Yes.
Is there a reason not to just put a chain link fence around it for 2 years and then leave those foundations to be removed with the rest of the entire? My question being, if we're spending $250,000 now, because I remember earlier there was a number that it was, I'm going to use 250 as a model. It was 250 to do this, and then to do everything else in 2 more years was 400,000. So my question would be, why can't we just leave it be for 2 years and then do the entire thing for less money?
There's a few hundred of these. It would, number one, look horrendous.
Well, I understand that.
I think the city would probably push back on us. And the cost, we're not wasting money. It's going to cost us, if we have to go down deeper, we would have to pay that now, because we actually asked that question, is it better off that we go down into 10 feet that they are? And it was, no. Again, they're going to break them off. If we left those up, it would really look, it would look
I'm
terrible.
assuming we would, yeah, theoretically just dump, we have a lot of.
We could have made an art project out of it, though, thinking about it.
Or I'm just saying, well, what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for the justification for the expenditure of the money, that we're not spending 250, that we could spend 50,000 later on. It would not be that we could get it by, even if we made it look a little pretty, there's no way that it would be, there's no cheaper option, is what I'm
Currently,
looking for.
no.
Okay.
Again, our hope is that we have grass growing and it's graded nicely and we won't have to touch them.
Even after,
Yes.
okay. Gotcha, okay.
Anything else? Mr. Gainer?
Ms. Ray? Yes. Mr. Zucker? Yes. Mr. Posh?
Yes.
Mr. Register?
Yes.
Mr. Silverman?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I can't get rid of my pencil, right? I have to keep this one.
I hope so.
Okay, it's nice and sharp. Okay, that's, regular business. Now we are ready for the work session, which is what we gathered for. So, Dr. Dixon?
Okay. All right. Thank you. So this evening, we have our task force presentation led by Toya Robinson and her team. And they're going to provide a recommendation to us from the gifted program. If you remember, some months ago, Toya and her team presented from the Hanover Research Study. And the next step was for her task force to look at the recommendations that were outlined from Hanover and to give us a program recommendation. Should we keep our current program? Should we look at a different model? What are some things that we needed to investigate differently and present those to the board? So tonight, her and her team is going to share that information and the work that they've done. She's going to talk about the process and, again, finalize those recommendations for next year and beyond. Okay, so I turn it over to Toya, and she can introduce her team.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here tonight. Again, my name is Toya Robinson, and I'm pleased to have sitting here with me some Cleveland Heights University Heights staff and some of the representatives from the Gifted Task Force. I'd like to introduce Mr. Bob Swagger, Director of Curriculum, and Ms. Quatrice James, Fairfax principal. They weren't task force members, but they did have input on some things, and they're going to share some information with you tonight. We have Mr. Todd Bruce, who has a child at the high school. He was a task force member, so he is representing Heights High. We have Mrs. Tiffany Ott, who was a task force member, and she's also a gifted teacher at Canterbury. You have Miss Debbie Frost, who was a task force member and the gifted teacher at Monticello. And you have Mrs. Jody Serini, who is a parent of a task force member, and she is representing Monticello Middle School. So the task force has worked together since October. We've met monthly. Towards the end, we met numerous times within that month. And then the group also met in subgroups on their own to look at information. When we look at the task force, we have included, again, some of the representatives and their names so that you can see what that entailed. The Gifted Task Force was comprised of 22 participants. And how that was done was letters were sent out to parents of gifted students, and they were asked if they would like to participate. And the principals were able to make the choice of choosing who they were going to have represent their schools. And after they made those choices and sent them to me, I was able to send out 22 invitations to invite people to be part of the task force. This task force came about because the district, again, as Dr. Dixon said, wanted to make sure we were offering the best services for our student population. We also know that we had some community members that were concerned because of the makeup of some of the self-contained classrooms. We had some people that were concerned about service, and on the other end, we had people that were happy with service, wanted more, and they were pleased with how their twice exceptional students were being handled in the classroom. The task force itself, the representation of that was very unique, because we had, the task force was representative of our enrollment population. So we had majority parents of color within the task force. And also within the task force, that was helpful when we had conversations, because we had parents who, their students might have been identified, but they never received any service within the district. We had parents whose students were identified and they've received a gamut of services because they've been in the district so long. We've had parents who, because they had multiple children, they might have had a student that was ID'd and then they had their own They had other students that didn't have an identification. So we were able to talk about how that affected them and their family. And then a lot of the task force members were also able to share how things were happening in their schools and their community. They might have had best friends or neighbors that their students weren't, or children weren't ID'd, or they had relationships with, and the struggles or the conversations that they had with those families. So again, they brought all that to the table when we were having these discussions. One of the things, again, that we did, and we also had teachers that were part of the task force, approximately 10. Again, as Dr. Dixon stated, we looked at the Hanover research and the surveys and the information that they brought to us, and we had a difficult task at hand. So ultimately, we needed to see what changes were going to be made and how we were going to focus on our children. And the task force had a purpose, and that was to identify best practices and the delivery of services. And all of these things that we were doing were going to be based on the strategic plan, goals 2 and 3. The task force started off with their meetings were informational. We had presentations on the report card and how that impacted, how the servicing of our students impacted us on the report card. We also looked at why students that identified weren't being serviced. We looked at students that were ID'd but weren't performing well in the regular classroom. We looked at so many different things. We looked at gifted terminology so that parents were understanding. We went over thoroughly the state laws so that they understood what it is we were able to do. And we looked at best practices, reviewed data, and shared experiences, like I said. And after sharing all this information, then the parents and the other task force members were able to get into subgroups to research the service options that the state would allow us to use. The questions that you see listed up here were questions when the parents and the task force members got into their subgroups to research the service options. There were questions that we came up with and looked at based on some of the concerns of the community and how that would help us as a whole. So these questions guided them through the research that they were doing on the service options. And at the end of their research, each subgroup came back to the full group of the task force, and they presented their findings to the group, and they also presented a one-page summary for everything that they found. The summaries for each subgroup is in the black folders that you have, and they were paper clipped together by a colored paper clip. So you have all of that information from what the task force researched. Another thing that happened while we were in the middle of researching and looking at different information, finally the state had decided to vote and change the gifted operating standards. That's supposed to happen every 5 to 8 years, but they hadn't changed it since 2008, and we've been waiting. So as of March of this year, they voted on and changed some of the operating standards, and this was actually beneficial for us as we were working on the task force, because some of the changes will allow us to be more flexible in our service options. And we have the old and the new. For example, almost before, only someone with a gifted certification was the only one that could service a gifted child. Now they're saying that there's a classroom teacher can help with the service of a gifted child as long as they receive 30 hours of training per year and they work with a gifted teacher. Another thing that we're happy about in the past, we've had no service at the high school. AP was not a service option. We are also able to use AP as a service, again with a requirement of 30 hours. One of the stumbling blocks we had was with the minute requirements. And now they've taken away those 225 minutes and 240 minutes, and there still is a percentage that we have to service in a particular content, but it's not going to be as strict as the minute requirements. And like before, people would ask about push-in or say, can't we do push-in? Push-in was not allowed. Now we are actually allowed to do some collaboration as long as there's training with the classroom teacher for the required 30 hours.
Can you
And one-
define push-in?
Push-in was when, this is what the district called it, when the gifted teacher was going in the classroom and teaching with the classroom teacher. Now they call it collaboration and co-teaching. But that was one of the things that people kept asking for, that they kept suggesting that we were not allowed to do. And also in your folders, there is a blue sheet that has a list of terms in there for you as well. So that if somebody forgets to explain what they're talking about, you have it. And one thing that's very different from the state that is a good thing is the amount of communication. There wasn't a lot of communication going out from gifted overall to the community and to the different stakeholders. And so now ODE is requiring that districts communicate more with parents. And we'll go over that in more detail later on. And the main thing that they required is that districts have a continuum of services. And we are going to define that for you later as well.
My section starts with, what does a gifted child or student look like? This is going to be a visualization. You're going to have 2 minutes. Based on surveys, emails, and responses, everyone has an opinion what a gifted child looks like. So just to get an idea, understanding of what our audience thinks a gifted child looks like, you're going to do an exercise. So you're going to take a couple minutes. There's a sheet in your folders, looks like this.
And there's some over that we put some over there on the back table for the audience as well, along with the PowerPoint.
And then we can want to understand what your perspectives are. So what does a good gifted child look like? So take a moment and pause for a second and think about what you believe a gifted child would look like. And here's a brainstorming chart, so we'll give you a couple minutes to think about it and respond on this sheet. And the clock is ticking.
You don't want a picture.
No picture today. That's what that comes, that's a visual comes in. Write down what immediately comes to your mind. Mr. Johnson, do you want a sheet? Would you like this sheet? Okay, I like to collect all those forms, send them over to me. No, you may keep them. Look at what you've brainstormed. I'm going to share some characteristics of some gifted students. See if you have some of similar traits. The gifted child can fit any of these descriptors, whether they're male, female, black, white, Hispanic, multiracial. A couple of them that stand out to me are unorganized. Does anybody have that on their list? Not an A student. Is that on anybody's list?
I had two things which are sort of relevant to that, and they're sort of, they can score well on a test, and likewise, they don't necessarily score well on a test.
Right. Daydreamers, underachieving, preoccupied, have a wild sense of humor. Anybody have that on their list? Abstract thinker, fidgety impulsiveness, precocious. They often teach themselves how to read. They have their curiosity, they're curious. They are deep thinkers. They are have probing ideas and questioning. Some of them are twice exceptional, attention span, and also some of them have unusual interests. So some of our gifted students can have any of these feelings or traits. The characteristics are numerous and they vary. Some characteristics are not typical of what people might think, or that is why it's important that CHUH offers a variety of or a continuum of services. One service option does not fit all of our children, and we must give our families choice. And the next slide is a bright learner versus a gifted learner. Generally, a bright student knows the answers, gets straight A's, good memorizer, whereas a gifted student asks the questions, and the behaviors and intellects may not match. They have a wild and silly ideas and prefer to be with adults. So they're intense and highly self-critical, and oftentimes people get those confused. So one of the misconceptions is that being bright and gifted are not the same. And I guess I want to talk about a few of those items there. We have students who can memorize and do well on tests, but then we have students who then have their own opinion about things. And I know you've heard those questions, what if? You get an answer, and then, of course, they want to have an answer or a question for the answer. So those are our gifted students.
All right, my turn. Okay, so a lot of what we've been talking about and what you've been hearing from Debbie and from Toya is what the gifted kid is, what a gifted child looks like, and maybe it's not the typical picture that you would think of the straight A, does well in class, good behavior kid. That's a misconception a lot of people have about gifted children. We make a real effort in this department to look at the students that we are identifying and that we're serving and attempting to make sure that we are catching all of those students, even the ones who are perhaps not that straight A, bright student who does well. I really like looking at numbers, and so I look at numbers a lot for Toya. And as we're looking at these numbers and looking at the ways we're identifying students, especially from underrepresented populations like twice exceptional, African American, Hispanic, we see here an example of, we want to highlight a success story that we have seen in the district, and this is Fairfax Elementary. And so we've been making a real effort to look at these students who are not your typical or stereotypical gifted student, if you will, and identify those students who have been slipping through the cracks. So in the 2015-2016 school year, you can see the blue represents the total number of gifted students at Fairfax Elementary School, and the red represents the number of them that are from underrepresented populations. So only 19% of the students that we were serving were from underrepresented populations. Jump to this year, 2016-2017, we have identified more students. It's a total of 48 students now receiving services at Fairfax, and 31% of those students are from our underrepresented groups. We still have a way to go, we're still working on it, but we have made huge increases in finding those students who have slipped through the cracks previously. How have we done this? It's all about an increased awareness, communication, and collaboration with the staff at Fairfax. We have a principal at Fairfax who opens up conversations about gifted children. We have the gifted intervention specialists working with classroom teachers at TBTs and at meetings. We actually have a gifted intervention specialist who is the grade level team lead at one of the grades at Fairfax. And so those conversations are happening more, the communication is happening more, and so we're catching more of those students who are not that stereotypical gifted kid, and that's where our numbers are coming from. So that's a success that we want to highlight, and we want to use what has been working there, offering professional development, going into the school, talking with teachers, communicate, and we want to spread that out to our other schools and have that same result happen throughout our district, so we don't miss those kids who are not your typical idea of what a gifted child is. One piece of that puzzle in finding those students is the individualized assessments that we do. Our school district offers 2 whole grade screenings for the whole gamut of gifted identification: reading, math, science, social studies, cognitive, etc. And those happen at grades 2 and at grade 6. There are other opportunities for reading and math identification scattered throughout, but that cognitive assessment happens in second and sixth grade, and we can miss kids. Let's say a kid moves in third grade, or they had a bad day on that testing day. One of the biggest things we're doing to increase our identification and service to these underrepresented populations are these individual assessments. And teachers can recommend students for assessment, students can recommend themselves, parents can recommend, peers can even nominate another peer that they think should be assessed for gifted education. Excuse me. So these individualized assessments are, they're nonverbal cognitive assessments. We use the NNAT3 and the Ravens progressive matrices as two of the assessments. And we have assessed this school year 109 students individually, in addition to all those other whole grade screenings that we do. And 69, which is 63% of those assessments, have been from underrepresented populations. So we are working really hard to make sure that we have that equity in our program and that we are reaching those students who may have slipped through the cracks previously.
So, hello everyone, I'm Patrice, I am the principal at Fairfax. She shared a lot of the process with you, and what I'll share is a really quick story of a student that was almost missed. He is an African-American fourth grade student that has behavioral issues, a lot of behavioral issues. He's actually been identified and he is receiving services for emotional disturbance. As we were in a team meeting, we're looking at data, just trying to see how we can better help our students grow. And so we came across this student and his scores were fairly high. They were really high. He also received good grades like throughout, the school year. But because his behavior is just so bad, he doesn't really fit the mold of what you would think a gifted student would look like. So I called Toya and I said, I have a student that I want to recommend, filled out the paperwork. He was identified. And so it was just a few weeks ago. So that's a success story. He is that student that you heard Toya identify as twice exceptional. So we have those situations where we'll have students that are receiving services for behavior, and then they've also been identified as a gifted student. Does he look like what we think that he would look like? Maybe not, but for us, the people that work with that population on a daily basis, we know that they come in different forms. So just because he has these behavioral issues, it does not mean that he is not a gifted student. That's my 30 seconds.
Continuum of services. Again, we said we would define continuum of services, and this is one of the things, again, that was addressed in the gifted operating standards that came out this past March. And what that means is, for gifted, it's generally defined as a range of level of service provided to meet the various needs of gifted students. The various levels of service are provided through a continuum and are perceived as horizontal and vertical, comprehensive for these students. So what they're trying to say in the gifted operating standards, you just don't have one service and everybody's supposed to either have that or they receive nothing. So again, many of the parents have shared about their particular children and how services worked and in some cases did not work for them. Based on that, we conducted our own, not from Hanover, but the district did our own student surveys. We even sent surveys out to the classroom teachers that have gifted students, and we sent some out to parents, and we had over 100 responses from the first survey. Some parents were happy, some were not, but several of them said thank you for at least sending it out so that their voices were heard. And those responses to the survey are also on the right-hand side of your folders, that you could read those privately. And at the end of the day, when we looked at people's responses, the one thing that we can agree on, because everybody wanted something different, was that we have the ability to choose. No one can choose what's right for someone else's child, but we still have to look at what's right for students, because everybody has a child that's different and unique. So we're going to share with you the choice for the community that we're hoping that CHUH can offer.
What is a heading number?
So to talk for a few minutes about the current services that we're offering at the elementary level. In grades 3 through 5 in all of our elementary buildings, students who are identified as superior cognitive, as gifted in reading or math or some combination, can be pulled out of the regular classroom into a resource room setting. They get service for the areas that they're identified in under the current rules for 225 minutes per area. There's a second option that we offer for students in grades 4 and 5. Students with any ID except for art IDs can be placed in a self-contained classroom where they receive gifted service all day with a gifted intervention specialist as their classroom teacher. Those classrooms are currently in 3 buildings, so students that participate in self-contained may have to change schools in order to do so. Both of these services that we have right now are well-liked by the parents of students who use them. That's probably not surprising. Some of the reasons behind that: a lot of gifted kids feel isolated in a regular classroom. Even if it's an accelerated classroom, they've moved up a grade, they feel a little cut off from their peers at times. Both of these services create sort of a cohort experience for them where they have peers who share a lot of commonalities with them, and they can form relationships through the pullout or through being in the self-contained class together. They're also getting services that are appropriate to their ID, and probably what we heard from a lot of parents, the crucial piece there is that they're getting social emotional support for their unique needs as gifted students. There are some advantages to both. The pullout program allows students to remain embedded in their home school. They remain embedded in their regular classroom. They're still with their peers. The self-contained, the advantage there is they're getting service all day long. And it's all gifted and all day. We moved to the district when our daughter was in 5th grade, and she was placed in the self-contained class at Roxborough. I can tell you that my daughter's experience was that she felt an immense sense of relief at being placed in this classroom, and for the first time she met true peers, she developed real friendships. It's tricky moving when your child is in 5th grade because you're thinking, we're getting ready to go into middle school and this is going to be a nightmare. Those friendships that she formed in 5th grade, she still has those relationships now in 9th grade. And so that year was really, really important to her. And that was surprising to us, because we moved. There's also research to back this up. Stories are good. Research is good, too. There's an article in your packet. It's yellow. Talking about how providing gifted student services to students from underrepresented groups, particularly students who come from poverty, may require different approaches, and a self-contained setting is one of their highly recommended services for students who are coming from an impoverished background. And one of the large things there is because it can build relationships and trust, and it can allow students sort of to blossom in a different sort of environment. The other advantage we've seen to self-contained is for twice exceptional students who have difficulty with transitions, not having to be pulled out of a class, put back in a class, simplifies things for them because transitions can be difficult. Now, there are problems with our existing services. There are gaps in our current model. We don't offer service for children in grades kindergarten through 2nd. Both of these models involve leaving peers behind or leaving a school behind, and sometimes that's too much for some families, for some children. Right now, if the child is identified in science, social studies, or creativity, the only option available is self-contained. And so, that's a gap too if self-contained doesn't work for your family. And of course, no one option is going to be right for all children. There's also been some controversy. There's some parents who are concerned about the impact of self-contained on our district. And so that's one of the reasons why the task force felt that providing a lot of options is important. Because there are some real advantages here to these services, but there's some serious problems too. There's also desire for broader reach. We'd like to see services that benefit all of the children in our district and not just children who are identified. And we'd like to make continual progress on the racial makeup of some classrooms and to fill in some of our gaps. And so we'd like to tell you what we're thinking about, what we'd like to see the district do. We'd like to keep our current options, and we've listed acceleration here because that will remain an option. Sorry. But what we're adding, this is the exciting part. So the first thing that we want to tell you about is the Primary Education Thinking Skills Program. This is a program that's targeted at kindergarten, first, and second grade. It involves a gifted intervention specialist rotating through each kindergarten, first, and second grade classroom in each building, providing lessons on thinking skills to all the children in the classroom. Thinking skills, problem solving, convergent and divergent thinking. There's a sample lesson in their package, Toya?
Yes.
Okay. Sample lesson in the package. We don't have a large number of identified students in grades kindergarten through second grade because our first grade level screen is in second, but there are some students. They're currently not receiving any official gifted service. This would count as service for those children, but it would be delivered to all children. Additionally, and this is an exciting piece of this program, it may help us with identification as children get to the grade level screens. If you've never encountered the sorts of questions and problems that they pose for you on the gifted screening, it might throw you, and then you don't score well, and then they don't catch you till sixth grade. Being exposed to difficult problems thinking that way in kindergarten, first, and second grade, we may see some improvements in the makeup of the students who are becoming identified. And I think the plan is launch next year. And so this is something we can get into place fairly quickly. The other new piece is for grades 3 through 5, and it's called cluster grouping. What cluster grouping does is it takes gifted students, and you've got a definition in your package, it puts them into a regular classroom, a heterogeneous classroom, a classroom with a mix of students from different ability levels, with a regular classroom teacher, not a gifted intervention specialist, who has received extensive training. This sort of service, it provides enrichment, extensions, higher order thinking, differentiation, compacting, acceleration, complexity. They promise in the moon, right? But it seems to work. It's a full-time gifted service. The students in the classroom are essentially receiving service all day. It also improves achievement overall because, again, this is a service that's being provided to every child in those classrooms. And it avoids some of the drawbacks of the others. We want to keep those options. There are some students who need, and we heard this from several parents, need to be in a self-contained class or really need just that one, that pull-out. But this is an additional option. Willoughby Eastlake is using cluster grouping. We had some members of the task force visited their school. The word that came back from them, and it matches up with the literature on cluster grouping, is that training is essential. You can't just say, hey, everybody, we're cluster grouping next year, let's go. No, that doesn't work. There's got to be training. The task force felt very good about cluster grouping. We had a vigorous conversation about it. We know that there are non-task force parents that have inquired and said, hey, has the district thought about doing cluster grouping? Maybe we should do cluster grouping. The plan would be that we spend a year training. The principals have to be trained first. They have to understand the impact this is going to have on their building, on their assigning of teachers. And then the teachers need training. And the recommendation is that there's a slow rollout. So a year of training, then we start it in third grade, and then the next year it goes into fourth. The changes to the gifted standards, especially if we implement cluster grouping, there's a lot more opportunity for the gifted teacher in the school to come into the regular classroom, especially the cluster grouped classroom, do some lessons with that teacher, to collaborate with that teacher. It might even rise to the level of co-teaching. That's That's a tough thing that requires a lot of training to really pull off successfully, but we think that the possibilities for increased collaboration are really, really exciting. So, summing up elementary for you, the plan is to move to a model that's providing enrichment to all the students in the district in the elementary grades through the primary education thinking skills and through cluster grouping, and providing additional options for gifted students and their parents so that the resource room pullout, the self-contained, the acceleration options still remain, so that we have a lot of options.
Hi, good evening. First of all, I want to thank the district for giving me the opportunity to serve on the task force. It was a unique experience. I learned a lot. I've met a lot of great people through the task force, so thank you. And I learned what gifted means. I learned about the state standards, and I learned what the state would not allow us to do, and now that they're making changes, things that we will be able to do. So that was pretty exciting. And I learned about what a continuum of service is and what that means. I've learned a lot about where we have done things successfully and where we can do better. Mainly what I learned was that I was wrong. And I'll tell you I was wrong because I was one of the first parents when we revamped our gifted program about 7 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was very much against it. I was concerned about the equity. I was concerned about the diversity. I was concerned that it separated children. I was concerned that my son, if he was identified, would have to move to a different school because we didn't have self-contained, and there was no pullout. So it was an all or nothing choice at that time. I was concerned about how it impacted the rest of the school. I was concerned about siblings. And what I found out was my son needed it. And this has been a dramatic difference in my son's life. I can tell you, he went to his principal one day and said, "School is not meeting all of my needs." He was bored. He wanted science, he wanted technology, he wanted engineering, he wanted math, and he felt that he wasn't getting any of that. It wasn't exciting. He liked school, and he didn't have any friends. He felt that he was different. He felt that nobody understood him, and he did not have any way to make friends. When he moved to a self-contained in elementary, that changed, and now that he's in MSSP, the Middle School Scholars Program, which I'm going to talk about, it has really opened up an awareness for him in learning, and he has made a lot of friends. He now has a group of peers, a cohort that he can relate to, and there's a group that can relate to him. He's all the things Debbie talked about. He's an intense thinker. He goes very deep on a subject. He talked for 54 minutes on a presentation he did on the history of flight. He needed this. He wasn't getting it in a regular classroom. So now I'll tell you about the middle school program because that's where he's at now. And our current program is the Middle School Scholars Program, and it's a resource room pullout. So that means that students have their regular scheduled classes, and then they get pulled out for special classes with the gifted intervention specialist. That means they are responsible for all the work in their regular class as well as all the work in their pullout. So the Middle School Scholars Program, it actually is made up of 6 different classes. And the classes we have now, the first one is called Between the Lines, and this is where students read thought-provoking literature, and they analyze and interpret the works. So they share their opinions, they develop critical thinking skills through the study of selected pieces of literature. The second class that the district currently offers is Global Issues, and this is where students engage in stimulating discussions on a broad spectrum of international issues, and much of the time is spent researching a country in depth. They learn about its people, its culture, its language, and they prepare for the Model United Nations simulations, which is fantastic. If you've never been, I encourage you, it's well worth the drive down to Columbus to see. Or go to John Carroll when they host it there. The third class is Guided Independent Projects, and this is a class where the student is really an investigator. They get to investigate and develop projects on topics within their specialized areas of interest. It's based on their gifted identification, and then they share their learnings with their peers and with their teacher. The fourth class is called APEX, so it's Applications and Explorations in Science and Mathematics. And in this course, students explore various fields of science and math through problem solving. It's a lot of hands-on activities and a lot of intensive research. And the students also they prepare and compete in the Science Olympiad competitions. The last two classes that we offer are Find Out and Flex, and these are two classes that are specifically designed to address the social-emotional piece. So Find Out is for the 6th grade classes, and this is, it covers a bunch of topics such as perfectionism, time management, how do you deal with being pulled out and being responsible for work in 2 other classes. And I can tell you that this class has really helped my son a lot. He has a lot of the perfectionist tendencies. He's very difficult on himself, and this social and emotional piece was really important to him and a lot of his peers. They talk about it when I'm driving them, and in their car, they're talking about what they learned and how they've got better strategies to deal with when they're so hard on themselves. And FLEX stands for Friendship, Leadership, and Executive Functions, and like Find Out, this is the social and emotional class that addresses those issues for the 7th graders. Right now, MSSP, so the Middle School Scholars Program, this resource pullout is the only offering we have for middle school students. There is no other offering that we have. It's a really good program. It provides deep dives in subjects for students. It addresses the social emotional needs. And it greatly benefits children who are identified as gifted in multiple areas. But it does have some downsides, and I'm going to talk about what those gaps are. First of all, it doesn't serve enough children. It only serves 154 kids currently. Because it's a pull-out program, it's challenging for some students, and particularly for the kids who are twice exceptional, who have difficulty keeping track of what they have to do in both classes, and then it's that transition that some kids struggle with. It also puts a lot of demands on students. It requires them to have really good organizational skills, and it puts a burden on them to understand what content they might be missing in their regular class. And they're not always pulled out of the subject that they're going for MSSP. So they may be pulled out of ELA, but they're going to study global issues. And they have to check in with their teachers a lot. And as a parent, you're always on Infinite Campus trying to make sure that they haven't missed something. And while it's a great program, it's not a continuum of services. It's a one, you get these 6 classes, you get some of those 6 classes depending on your identification, but it's a pull-out or it's nothing. So some of the benefits are it addresses the social and emotional needs, but it falls short on it benefits only children who are identified as gifted. It's not a continuum of services. It can be very challenging, especially for our twice exceptional kids and for any child who is struggling with organizational skills. So we do have some recommendations for the future of what we think we should do. First of all, we want to keep what's working. For the kids who MSSP is a good program and that they're successful in it, we'd like to keep it for that. But we'd like to add a couple of other things. With the additional flexibility that the new state standards are allowing us, we think that we should add some co-teaching, collaboration, and cluster grouping at older grades, just as Mr. Bruce had mentioned. And we want to make sure that we call these honors classes and that we define what that means. So you wonder if this is such a great idea, why would we wait? Because it's something that, Mr. Bruce said that we couldn't just suddenly jump into it and say, let's do cluster grouping next year. We need to take some time to figure out what we mean by that. We need to take some time for training. Because all the research that we looked at as a task force said that you need to do it right or don't waste your time doing it at all. Middle school is a key development crossroad in a student's life. We need to help bridge this gap. We need to allow more students to have access to higher level classes and to be involved in some of the great programs that we are offering. So in summary, we believe that maintaining the resource room pullout and adding honors that would involve co-teaching, collaboration, and cluster grouping to middle schools would benefit many. And looking back at our guiding questions that we had talked about, if we implemented this model of the resource room pullout, as well as having an honors that involve the co-teaching, collaboration, and cluster grouping, we believe it would promote diversity. We believe it would improve our district. We would reach more children. We believe we would address the whole gifted child. It would work in all of our schools, both of our middle schools. It would help students grow academically. It would address the social and emotional needs, and it would benefit the twice exceptional students. So I want to leave you with, just adding a few services would benefit so many children. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Bob, who's going to cover what we mean by when we say defining honors.
Good evening, everybody. How are you? So when we talk about honors courses at our middle school, we've had several iterations, even as I've been here, about what does that actually mean. Our honors courses, middle school courses that offer high school credit, are these a different curriculum, a different pace? Is this about providing different access? So there's been a lot of different iterations as we've thought about what does honors mean in our district. And that's just even from my own personal experience teaching at the middle school. And I think that as we're looking at defining honors, we really want to be thoughtful to what is the path that honors where will it lead? How is it going to allow students to follow a pathway up towards the high school realm, even to some of our college credit plus offerings that we embrace as a district? So the goal with defining honors is really thinking about what are we allowing our students to access, and how does that fit with some of the other goals of our district? How do we make sure that it is fitting within how we're defining equity in our district? How does it fit with our equity policy? And how does it really make sure that it allows students to access upper level course materials as they move to the high school? So when we think about defining honors, it really moves into bridging services to the high school. When we think about our current reality of offering AP courses as we do at the high school, we offer a plethora of AP courses. I think at last count we were offering 19 AP courses, which I checked my own high school. I went to Padua Franciscan High School. We have 7 currently. Just thinking about the tremendous amount of offerings that we have in our district, and how do we make sure that we don't just say we're offering them, but we're actually funneling students to those opportunities. That's the ultimate goal. When we have 19 courses, how do we make sure that we're expanding how many students are actually moving towards those courses? One of our big district initiatives has been working with an organization called Equal Opportunity Schools. We've actually been working with them for about a year and a half. At this point in time, we have continued their services and their help with increasing student participation in AP courses, AP level courses. And a lot of this goes right back to what we were talking about with identification of gifted services. So we've got students that are sitting at the high school that should be in AP courses. They have the ability to be in AP courses, but there's a barrier. And some of that might be a confidence barrier. It could be the students just don't know. Maybe they're just saying they don't know. But for whatever reason, we're missing students when we look at who should be in AP courses. And with the help of the EOS group, we've been able to identify this year over 100 students that were not enrolled in AP classes that were in AP courses this year. Obviously, there was a little bit of a learning curve. Some of those students made that jump and may have regressed. We did not lose very many students that dropped out of those AP courses. But as a district, we've been thinking, how do we provide additional support? Because it's not just getting students into AP courses, it's supporting them throughout that opportunity, so they can feel successful, that they want to take additional AP courses. So we will have ongoing professional development in order to help our students embrace these AP courses. This is AP testing is actually taking place. It's finishing up. Did it just finish up?
No, it's finishing up this week.
Finishes up this week. But we are asking students, even as they are done testing, what kind of supports would be helpful to you? So students are completing surveys. They're giving us feedback on, Would Saturday sessions be more helpful to help you stay in these AP courses? Are you feeling supported? Do you have a trusted adult that at the school will actually give you some information and help you boost your confidence? Sometimes it's just about students hearing, you can do this, you do belong, and we do believe in you. Like, that goes a long way with helping students become successful in AP courses. As was mentioned earlier, even organizational skills are a major factor in student success. Time management. How do I go home and balance an AP course with my regular coursework? So some of the supports that we continue to focus on in the district is using the AVID system as a support for our first-time AP students. Some of the recommendations beyond trying to build this bridge from middle school gifted program and honors courses into the AP courses is to think about how do we phase in honors courses to bridge this AP gap. And this is really where the defining honors needs to take place. The bridge that we're trying to build says students come from the middle school, they're ready for the rigors of some challenging coursework, but it really needs to lead somewhere. One of the things that we even look at is students are unable to get to our stats course, our AP stats course, unless they take algebra in the 8th grade. That's a reality. They cannot complete high school graduation requirements if they are waiting until 9th grade to get to algebra. It's 4 years graduation requirement, and it really does take us looking at the systems that we have in place. What does it look like? What's too early for students to be able to access this? Do we look at grade acceleration? Are students finishing the sequence? So if we move into algebra in 7th or 8th grade, do we see the trend or the support there for students to move all the way through their 4-year high school graduation requirement and move and finish that sequence to AP stats? If not, then we've got to make sure we're providing the supports for students to make sure that once they're on this track that they feel supported and they can have the success. And that's really why we want to take a little bit of time to develop the honors piece. It's not just about implementing courses. It's about creating a program. One of our former colleagues here that now works for College Board says, we've got a lot of AP courses, but are we interested in developing an AP program? And that's a lot different when you think about dedicating resources and time and really being thoughtful about building these bridges from accelerated courses in the elementary, gifted courses in the middle school, or honors courses in the middle school, all the way up through our AP and College Credit Plus in the high school. So that's really where we want to spend some time trying to be thoughtful about how to create an AP program in Cleveland Heights.
Okay, so there's numbers up on the screen, so that means I get to talk again. And you can see at the top of this, we're talking about the state report card, right, which is important. But before I dive into that, I want to start out by saying everything that you have heard from the people sitting by me at this table here is so much more important than the number on our state report card, because we're talking about kids and their stories and their options and our community having access to a true continuum of services that benefits so much more than just a tiny fraction of our population. The state report card is just going to support what everybody else just said. So on the state report card, we are graded as a district on how well we serve gifted students. And there are a couple different parts of that gifted score. One of them is called Gifted Input Data. And this is a really complicated table with a bunch of numbers and percentages that Allison Bird, if she's still here, actually explained to me. It's really complicated, and so I'm going to try and simplify it down to a couple key ideas. This Gifted Input Data rating is based on two key things. Number one, the percentage of our student population that we are identifying as gifted. And it looks at K3, 4-8, 9-12 grade bands. It looks at underrepresented populations. It looks at economically disadvantaged students. And it simply asks, how many of your students are you identifying as gifted? Okay? The second piece to this is what percentage of those students that we have identified are we actually serving? Okay, the state of Ohio requires that we identify students. Serving them is another matter. And so this state report card rating really asks, yeah, you're identifying, but are you really giving them the services that they need to be successful? So it takes all of those different percentages and ratings and lumps them in together into a score. In the 2015-2016 school year, we earned 60 points. You needed to earn 60 points to meet this requirement. We did it, barely, by the skin of our teeth, okay? But then, of course, that rating, that cutoff score increases. And so this year, we need 80 points to be considered met on the gifted input data. And with the services that we offer right now in this district, that is impossible. We are not going to get that, period. We do not serve our high school students. We do not serve K-2 students. And that's a real problem. If we take all of these different things that we've talked about, continuing improving our identification of underrepresented populations, offering that true continuum of services, and serving more than 80% of our gifted students, that's like the top level for this, which we will easily do with these programs, we will easily be on track to hit that 80 points and exceed it as we move forward into 2019 when all of these cluster grouping things are put into place, as long as they don't raise the bar again. Okay? So all of this tells us that we are serving our students better if we implement these models. And it helps us on the state report card.
Okay, thank you, everyone, so far. So this is what we are proposing that we are going to do and improve on. Gifted resources and information will be given to all families when they come into the district at registration. And this was also a request from parents. Students entering the district will be tested within 90 days of registration. In partnership with the data team and the building principals, testing information will be sent out to all district parents, not just gifted parents, but all parents. Professional development will be available to all teachers, not just gifted teachers, but all classroom teachers. 30 hours required of the teachers who offer service in conjunction with staff PD days and at the ESC. One of the benefits of this is I am part of a team that's putting together the training modules for the northern part of the state. We are working with the ESC and a group of coordinators together that will be tied in conjunction to Cleveland State and some other colleges, so we can offer these services to all the school districts in northern Ohio. The district will improve the screening process. We can't change it, change identification, because that is defined by the state, but the teachers are in the process of creating checklists that, based on characteristics, like some of the stories that were shared, of what a gifted child looks like that's twice exceptional, or in poverty, or a child of color. And we will use those checklists to train principals and building staff, so when they're in their classrooms, they know what those characteristics look like. We will train the district staff in clustering. We are going to offer training not only for the teacher that is hired for the primary education thinking skills, but we're also going to offer the training to the K through 2 classroom teachers. The Gifted Task Force will continue, but it will become an advisory board to continue helping us work through this process. Another thing, I've been chosen to be part of the state of Ohio's Gifted Diversity Board. So we are also working on that, and there's actually a presentation on Wednesday to the governing board of how we're looking at students of color, students of poverty, gifted students with a special ed identification as well. So that's something that we're all working on together. This process has caused a lot of pain for people. It's a sensitive subject. We want to make sure that we're bridging that gap. We can't go from one extreme to the other. We need to offer, sorry, Bob, I just hit him, offer full service to what we can and extend it to everyone. We don't want to see people getting upset or not talking to their neighbors because they feel that somebody has something that they don't have. And so at the end of the day, again, we're here for children. And so as we're doing this, we want to make sure we end with letting you know what's here for everybody, not for the gifted kids, but for all students of Cleveland Heights, University Heights. and that's the primary education thinking skills for all K through 2 children, the phase-in of clustering that will be used for all the schools. Acceleration is not a gifted service. How anybody can be accelerated, and I think people don't understand that. They put it under the umbrella of gifted, but you do not have to be gifted to be accelerated. Bob talked intensively about the parameters for defining what honors is. Advanced placement, it can be for anybody. We just have to get the students to believe that there's an expectation that we believe in them, and so they can believe in themselves. And we're also offering this summer some enrichment camps. We have AP boot camp that we're preparing the students for, and we're offering an art camp and drama and theater at Oxford this year. And we were actually able to identify over 20 students in the arts this year because of working with Oxford and the high school and some other districts. And the main thing is we're offering training to everybody. So we wanted you to know what is for all, because, again, we're not saying that anybody's better than anybody else, but we want this district to have choice. So I thank you for everybody on the presentation, and we are open for questions.
Great. Thank you. So are there, anybody got any burning questions? Or
Yeah.
less burning questions even?
Yeah, you had mentioned in the self-contained buildings, it's 3 of them? And what buildings are those?
They are Fairfax, Boulevard, and Roxelle.
Thank you.
Eric?
You recommending expanding that?
Not right now. That's why we want to make sure that we're offering the clustering and the resource room pullout. Because we have some buildings, for example, I can speak to that for Canterbury, their numbers are growing. They're probably, with their gifted population is growing probably more than any other building, but they prefer the resource room pullout model. So we, again, want to make sure we offer it to people that want it, but expanding self-contained is not something we're looking at right now.
Eric?
I got a bunch of questions. The first question I would pose, I'm asking, I don't know who I'm directing it to. Are we voting on this? Is there, so this is just,
No.
we're being told what staff is doing? Okay,
The recommendation from the task force.
okay. Then my second question is there a report with all the text everybody's mentioning, is there a report that we're to receive with what you referenced, or are we just, it's just a PowerPoint? I mean, is there an actual document of, this is the plan?
This is the PowerPoint and the information that was given to you in your folder.
So the plan is the slides in the PowerPoint and the handouts? That's that?
What do you want?
Well, no, is there a plan? I mean,
There's,
there's a whole lot of, there's a whole lot of stuff here. What I'm looking for, is there a document, if I'm a member of the public and I go on the website, I have the PowerPoint, but I don't, I mean, a lot of
we
these
put a
things.
comprehensive document together that's going to outline what we're going to do.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, the reason I'm saying is, I mean, a lot of these, we have major suggestions or proposals, and it's a line or two on the PowerPoint. So I'm looking for the detail and the narrative, but basically I'm looking for the narrative besides the PowerPoint. The next question I would have is.
And I don't mean to interrupt you, but required by the state anyways, when this happens, it has to be sent to the state, it has to be approved, and that is one of the requirements, that it is put out in the public.
Okay.
For everyone, so that has to be out there. So, for example, when people are coming to registration, there is a document that will be given to them to show what is being offered.
When would that be shared with us, I guess?
That doesn't, it gets approved, we can try and put something together, but it gets approved through the state over the summer.
Okay. On the, I think it was your, well, these glasses aren't even good enough. On slide 4, you had a whole list of guiding questions. In your narrative, are those questions answered?
Yes, the questions are answered in your package. You were given with a paper clip, a colored paper clip, when
on the
the
right side of your
task
folder.
force subgroups
Right there.
gathered all their information together, they answered
So-
those questions
So the questions on slide 4 are answered in this handout?
in those documents.
Okay. Let's see, my next question was, you had slide 9, I think it was. Do you have any other data in regard to, when we look at enrollment numbers and broken down by the disparity in demographic breakdown, do we have data besides the last 2 years?
Can't, besides the last 2 years, I'm sure there's something that we can work with Allison to come up, but we want to make sure we're not comparing apples to oranges because service was different
Well,
2 years
well,
ago.
I know, I'm just saying, if services change, I know when I would be tracking voting trends, for voting patterns, when they would change precincts, it would reassign the precincts. So you would have a linear data, but at the break point, you would denote that, there's a change in services or methodology.
So do you want data in regards to underrepresented groups?
Well, I'm curious to see what our enrollment has been in gifted programs in the past, and then I know that we're looking at underrepresentation and underservice. I'm curious to see how that has increased or decreased over time as well. I'll be curious to see that.
Because we presented that at the last, a couple of board meetings ago also,
Right.
that we were given that we gave that to you, sorry.
I know Jim mentioned, I think it was answered, right now, we have the pull-out program, Roxborough, Fairfax, and, I'm sorry, the self-contained.
Self-contained.
I know you mentioned that parents like it, what have you. The one thing, when Doug Hoyer implemented that, I was I thought the building selection, I'm not sure if my concern as someone who grew up north of Mayfield and spent a long time living in University Heights is I think that the location reinforces pre-existing long-term stereotypes in regard to buildings. So I'm disappointed that we don't have at least one of these north of Mayfield. I'm disappointed by that.
And we actually looked at that and addressed it. We didn't know where the direction was. We didn't want to change it right now, and with the grade level configurations and what's happening with that, we've looked at possibly changing that when that decision is being made with the grade level so it was discussed.
Yeah, and likewise, I know what you said about Canterbury, but again, the clustering Boulevard has for over 30 years has been sort of, we'll make that it's a magnet school. We'll put stuff there to draw other students, but in my personal opinion, the placement in Roxborough and Fairfax only adds to a pre-existing narrative and reinforces that perception, which is why I thought Hoyer's selection was less than ideal.
And again, you're right, that came up, we discussed it, we discussed about moving things, we wanted to wait to see the direction of the district, because we didn't want to move something, then something else was changed.
In all of the different scenarios you're looking at with the programs, do we have any information in regard to cost and staffing models for FTEs? Do we have that information?
For right now, the only addition that we have is we are in the process next week of hiring a PETS teacher. Most of the things we're doing will be in-house, and Bob and I have had discussions because that's why we're working through the ESC and training that we can offer for the building. We already have a contract with the ESC, but the only extra cost it's going to be is for training teachers. And we have to do that anyways once we're building curriculum. Some of the training, for example, can be through UDL or some of the models we're already having.
UDL stands for, I'm sorry.
Universal Design.
Okay.
For learning.
So basically, we're looking at this juncture, the cost for what's being proposed is, or I'm sorry, not proposed.
Adding a teacher.
Is already, basically, we have to do in-service training anyway for staff, so this would be a change on that then.
A lot is going to be done in-house.
If you go to that the last screen again, Toya, yes, so that program there will require a teacher. The phase-in clustering, professional development, all of those, the camp and enrichment activities, we do provide some dollars to make sure that teachers are paid for their enrichment camps and the training. So professional development, training, and then a teacher above. It would be additional staff member.
Yeah, and again, I guess the question I would pose as well, I know you had at a previous meeting, you had mentioned that parents, when they would get a gifted designation or what have you, frequently we saw folks moving from our system to other systems. The question I would pose in that regard then is, what we currently do and what's being proposed, how does that compare to these systems that students are leaving us for and going to? I mean, if they're going to a neighboring system, what does Shaker or Brush or Beechwood offer that we're What are we doing that they?
For example, Shaker has enrichment. Shaker does not have gifted services, and that was a lot of confusion. People kept comparing us to Shaker. Shaker doesn't have gifted. With the new operating standards come in, we were sitting in a room with 200 gifted coordinators for the state, and a lot of people were panicking because of what the state is saying, that we have to do this, 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 and that. Debbie was at that meeting with me, and we were about the only two out of the room that were smiling, because a lot of the things the district was doing, a lot of the things the state was requiring, we already had in place, or we had systems for that. So people, different districts are in the middle right now revamping services and trying to figure out what they're doing. The state will release the actual operating standards sometime in the next month, so we'll be finding out what districts are doing, because a lot of these things have changed. Some districts are scared because they don't think they're going to be able to figure out all the communication piece. Like one of the requirements is the grade level screenings. We were already doing that, but now it's a requirement. And some districts were afraid that they wouldn't be able to afford it. So we might see some change in how districts are servicing or what they're doing. Another requirement is that if a student is ID'd and not serviced, a letter has to go out. And you should have heard the moans in the room, because there are a lot of districts that aren't servicing. And now they're panicking that they have to remind people that they're not doing anything for their students. So we're waiting to see what's going to happen, because a lot of things are in the air and things are changing. But we did look at Shaker, we looked at Solon, we looked at that other places in the area, but everybody's going to change right now because of the standards.
And then I guess from a mathematics question, I guess to a degree, because I know on the slide 18, we were basically, clearly we're hitting the rating, but if we don't modify, we're not going to reach it. I guess conversely, from a mathematics standpoint, if we're working against ourselves by working to identify more students, but not offering additional programming, we're in fact, as much as by doing the right thing, it's hurting us on the state numbers. If my math skills were correct, okay. So we're identifying more students, but we don't have stuff for them.
Well, may I also mention, if you don't mind, Toya, our percentage of service, whether we're identifying more students or not, this year, we're still not serving any high school kids or any K-2 kids. So that increase in identification that I talked about isn't enough.
Okay.
It's not hurting us. Does that make sense?
The reality is, if we weren't doing the over-identification, the changing the standard as a whole, by moving the benchmark, even then, that we would drop below anyway.
Yes.
The additional identification only adds to that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And don't we also get penalized if we're under-identifying?
Yes, because part of that is identifying a certain percentage of your student as gifted.
But basically, the state's
The state wants what we're doing, what we propose.
I can't use the language I want to use.
Right.
Thank goodness.
The state wants the broad, yep.
Yes.
Because you're going to get dinged if you're, yeah.
Why is this year any different from the other?
Do you have other questions?
That's all my questions.
Good.
I'm sorry, I had
Cal,
questions.
you got any questions?
Oh, I got a whole bunch.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so I know putting together a task force that involves parents and staff, it's a lot of work. So thanks. I mean, it's really a lot of work, and I've sat on these kinds of things, and you sort of really fall into it, and you really enjoy it, and it's really great. So, you may hear us challenge a little bit. I mean, it's not because we're sort of angry. I think we're just trying to tease out information, just sort of think about it. I mean, the way that, there's been a lot of concern in our community in the way we deliver gifted services, okay? And I'm really great that we're thinking about solutions and how to address those things. Can you go to slide, I think 7? It was the highly animated one. It was the one that we saw after the ABC brainstorming thing.
It's Debbie's slide.
Yeah. Okay, that slide. I mean, when I look at that slide, that's sort of me, that's a Cleveland Heights kid, okay? I mean, you can take any piece of that, okay, whether you're gifted or not. And and I know you have the state definition of gifted, but then you also have kids that, for the lack of any other purpose, the parents feel they're gifted, and maybe they have a lot of gifted talent. And I know there's sort of a legal way that we have to deliver a certain set of services, but there's also sort of, I think, something that we as a community, when we think about student achievement, is we need to sort of deal with those kinds of kids. You know, going back a generation when my kids initially weren't part of the gifted program because we didn't want to participate in it, and then we got into it, and then we got out of it. There was a thing called a contract where a child who wouldn't have maybe got the right number on the test would be able to go into a gifted program, but they had to it wasn't actually signing a paper, but it was called a contract where the child had to keep up, and if the child wasn't able to keep up, then the child would have to not be part of the gifted program. And it just seemed to me all the kids who were sort of put into that environment, they thrived because they were sort of put into an environment where those kids were there with other kids, maybe they were with friends, or they made acquaintances with other people, but they were motivated enough to lift themselves up. So, I mean, I sort of look at that as, even though the state doesn't define you as gifted, you could be gifted. I mean, I know a child who was tested during allergy season, couldn't think, passed over. So I think we have to be really careful when we look at gifted, what we call gifted, and what we want to do as far as maintaining a commitment to the community to make sure that all our kids are succeeding. I mean, I love having this kind of conversation. We've been talking about facilities for such a long time. I mean, this is really about student achievement, and this is what it's all about. I mean, I think we're gonna have a gorgeous high school. The high school needed to get repaired, okay? But is that high school really gonna lift up the kids and really let them achieve more? It may help a little bit, but it's not gonna increase our scores on the test scores. And I know it's not the test scores, but it's great to have this. Yeah, it's great to have this kind of conversation. So, specific questions. Just an idea as far as how your committee was represented. There's a lot of parents that have chosen not to participate in the gifted program. Were they included in this task force?
Yes, that's what I said in the beginning. There were parents that had students that were identified, but they did not, their students weren't being serviced.
Okay, so you had parents who were not, I mean, current parents then?
Correct.
Okay.
I wanted to address that when you were giving your scenario, your story about there was a contract and kids were allowed to sign that and participate with gifted even though they weren't identified. That was when the operating standards, that's when I was a middle school gifted teacher, and the operating standards stated that gifted teachers were allowed to work with high ability students. You did not have to be identified as gifted. That was several years ago. Now, the law specifically states that we are not allowed to do that. So that's why the clustering and the co-teaching and the collaboration, even though that requires professional development, 30 hours a year, that's why that's important, because that would be offering not exactly the same, but some of the same things to those students who aren't identified.
Just, can I piggyback on your issue? The testing, I think you talked about the state definition of gifted.
Yes.
And so we're throwing some things around, and you had some concerns about the student that had allergy and not being able to perform well on the test. And we completely, I think we're in a world where the test defines who's gifted, right? I mean, there's absolutely no other way to
That's all
do it,
Ohio
right?
allows, yes.
Say that again?
That's all Ohio allows.
Okay, then I guess the question becomes, has there been any conversations or studies of any sort that talks about bias in testing?
Yes, that's why.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, and that's why Tiffany explained that slide to you, why we're using nonverbal. I have worked with testing and assessment at Ohio State. We've had conversations. I explained I was part of the diversity committee for the state of Ohio. We're talking about that. We're writing a white paper on it right now to submit to the state. That's why we're using nonverbal assessments, because there is cultural bias in some of the tests that we're using. And so that's why she showed you that slide of underrepresented groups that receiving nonverbal assessments, because it gives them problem-solving techniques and questions that are removing the language, using puzzles and different things because of the bias portion. We are now also identifying more students as creative because that was removed from what CHUH was doing previously.
I'm sorry, Jim, can I keep your
Yeah, go
question
ahead.
for a minute?
Yeah.
The white paper, I would be interested, would you please share that?
Yes, when we're finished. The draft gets proposed to the board tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Right, okay. And again, there's some other terminology that is mixed in here too. We got the high ability, the high achievement, achieving, the bright, or whatever. These are different names for students who are not gifted, shall we say? Are not tested as gifted?
And not being.
But they're not different, right?
What's not different?
There's some terminology that's being used, like bright, high ability, high achieving, blah, blah, blah. I'm asking, are these students in the same basket? Are they, I mean, can
Those are
these,
students that are not
same,
identified
could these be the same students? They're just those students that seem to be bright, seem to be with it, seem to be doing some good stuff. I think it was was it the bright student that you had this list of traits related to it? And I guess I'm just trying to get the language to some extent, and that is you got high ability, high achievement, bright. Are those the same students? And are they the same students that are doing well or know stuff, and they academically or whatever, they do well, but they're not tested as gifted? Is that the distinction?
Yes.
Okay.
Based on the state of Ohio definition of gifted, yes.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Yes, those are all terms the state of Ohio
I'm just
uses.
dealing with the
Yes.
language right now.
And it's a bit of a Venn diagram too, because you do have gifted students who do get good grades and please the teachers and have friends. But it's sort of that cultural stereotype, right? We have this idea that the gifted students are those, and they aren't. So there are kids who do know the answers, get good grades, don't qualify under the state's definition of gifted. There are students who do qualify under the state's definition of gifted that we would not put into that bright category at all.
There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Some states, actually, if the state hasn't defined their gifted parameters, they're allowed to do portfolios, they're allowed to have teacher input. I think those type of systems are perfect. The state of Ohio does not allow that. Have I had conversations with the people that I know of there that said, have you looked at portfolios? They want to make sure that we're not discriminating against students of color, but at the same time, the studies and data shows that a lot of tests have bias in them, especially when that's the only measure used to identify a student, but Ohio has not changed that yet. So that's why we're trying to use the requirements, because we have to, but trying to put in other measures and other supports so we can help with that, but we can't change the actual identification process.
And at this point, the testing is an administrative rule, right? I mean, the Board of
Yes.
Education or
The
the State
state,
Department
yes.
decided that this is the way
It
it's
is a
gonna
rule.
be, and there's no filter beyond that at this point. Okay, thank you.
Good. Do we, the number of slots that we have for the gifted kids, I mean, do we have enough? Are we at capacity? Or don't we have?
Okay, let me ask some questions. So are you asking in particular about a self-contained classroom? Because when you say the number of slots,
Well, I'm talking about the self-contained.
Self-contained
Well, yeah, I mean,
is
let's look
20.
at it from both. I mean, let's look at it from the middle school perspective, MSSP. I mean, and then let's also look at it from the self-contained classroom.
so right now, the state defines a self-contained classroom can have 20 or less students in it. So do we have enough slots for the students that are choosing or the families that are making the choice to go to self-contained, yes. That's going to stay at that number for next year. The MSSP, or resource room pullout, the teachers are limited to 15 students at one time, but their caseload can be 60. I believe for the new operating standards for next year, that increases to 80. Is it 80?
80 total, 20 at a time.
80 total, 20 at a time.
So we have no bottleneck, so if you are earmarked as gifted, we've got a slot for you.
In something, in a continuum of services.
And-
If everybody had to go to self-contained, no, we wouldn't have enough.
And let's, can I pick it back again?
Well, can I ask you one quick question? I mean, so we have no parents, though, that want to be in self-contained that have been earmarked, and they can't be serviced?
Not right now. When I came in here, yes. There were waiting lists. The first year I was here, I think there was a waiting list with like 30 kids on it.
Okay, wrong, sorry.
So what do you attribute the change to? I mean, we didn't increase the pullout, the
We
self-contained.
didn't have pullout.
No, we didn't increase the self-contained classrooms.
Yes, we added Fairfax, so that opened it up
Okay,
for
so
2
we
more
put 20 more,
classrooms, and we
and then
added
not
resource room
10
pullout.
of them just decided they didn't want it anymore, I guess.
We added resource room pullout, so you
Pullout.
added
So
service that we didn't
That means that we're
originally have.
getting, I guess we got some of the answers in that questionnaire, the survey that you did. But what we can feel is that people are fairly satisfied with the pullout.
Yes, you have, again, when you look at that survey, you're going to see a gamut of responses. A lot of them are personal. This works for my child. You'll have people say, I only want pull-out for my child. I don't like self-contained. You have people saying, my child has had both. You have people saying, I only want self-contained, I don't want pull-out.
Related to Jim's question, we have a number of teachers that had to be certified, and they no longer have to be certified, right?
No, they still have to be certified.
They still have to be
Yes.
certified. So is there, as we go through the process of increasing the number of students that we have, that we are identifying as gifted, are we going to have more certified?
That's the beauty of the operating standards that just changed. As long as they have direct contact with someone that has a gifted certification, and they receive that 30 hours, then we're able to call that service with the classroom teachers.
Okay, then I'll ask this question. How many certified gifted teachers do we have?
In the district, I think we have 2 or maybe 2 or 3, and that aren't in the gifted department, but we have 12. We have 12.
So we could conceivably the students could exceed the teachers at some point in the future.
Well, with the caseloads, and because we don't have them all the time, again, if we're servicing through the parameters they've given us, like, for example, we're gonna start service with AP next year, as long as I'm sending those teachers to college board, and just so happened Miss Samara, has gifted certification, and then she's working with those teachers, and we're offering training, and one of the gifted teachers is going up there to help with the WEPs, we can document and call that training, so we can call that service.
Without any increases.
Without any increasing of staff.
So,
We couldn't have done that this year.
So the new operating standard says, I'm gifted certified, and I might have 5 of the teachers that I'm working with at some level, and that means that they can fully serve gifted students.
With 30 hours of training per year.
Okay.
Okay, I heard a comment from someone that basically says transitions can be difficult. This is one of my fears if we move to an upper and lower middle school. I mean, this is not a comment that really is appropriate to discuss tonight, but I hope we as a board can talk a little bit about that at some time in the future. A leveled classroom versus a cluster grouping, are those the same thing?
Oh, like performance grouping, is that what you mean by level classroom?
Well, parents have approached me and used the word, I wish we had leveled classrooms in certain of our buildings. I think the last one I heard was about science in the middle schools.
Oh, so like,
So-
upper level science classes? That's what
Yeah, I mean, but is
No,
that the
that's
same thing
different.
as,
No, those
so
are
what then is the difference between that and a cluster grouping?
Okay, well, I don't want to speak to the level piece. Your cluster grouping definition is on the blue paper, and you also have a sheet, a document of the research of what clustering looks like, and I can get you more information on that. Do you want to
Okay.
address the level one?
What we,
Because it's not
Okay,
level.
and that's in the packet that we just got tonight,
Yes.
so, okay. I-
and so Jim, next time you hear that, maybe you should ask somebody to explain what they're talking about.
What
So we
level
can
means,
get our,
because clustering is
our
a-
terminology together.
Good call. So the last slide about the state report card, I mean, I don't take a lot of credibility when it looks at that state report card, but here we are being presented that it would be a really good idea to do this K through 2, gifted, and gifted in the high school. And then it looks like on the state report card, if we would have done that a while back, we wouldn't be dinged this coming year. I mean, it seems like that sort of something that we missed. And, I mean, I'm not sure that's, you guys can comment on that, but, I mean, I'm a little concerned
It's
about
the new
that.
operating standards. We previously could not do the service that we're considering at the high school and at the K2 level and call it gifted services until the new operating standards were voted on. So that changed everything.
To have a high school class under the old standards count as gifted service, it would have had to been gifted students only and a gifted teacher who was double certified, gifted, and whatever they were teaching. And, I mean, that's just not feasible to, we don't have the numbers or.
Okay, so.
That would have been an increase in cost
Okay,
and
so,
staff.
so no high school then is able to meet that requirement?
If they
Well, no, because I can give you the example of Columbus. Columbus has gifted teachers working in the high schools. They have gifted coordinators working in the high schools. So, again, you would have to have a certified staff member assigned to the high schools working with those people. We don't have the staff for that or the capacity.
Now, a lot of districts, when we did the research, it was tricky, especially looking at middle school and high school, because you get things in the brochure that aren't technically gifted service under the state standards. You know, everybody puts acceleration on their gifted brochure. That's not a gifted service, that's available to all students in the state by state law. And so every high school is saying, we offer AP and honors classes on their gifted brochure, but it wasn't gifted
But
service.
it wasn't service. Yeah. And you're allowed, when a child is accelerated, you're allowed to count that as service for 1 year, and then after that, that's the classroom that they're in.
Okay, so this seems really good. It seems like we've got some homework to do because of this stuff in here, and I'm sort of eager to look at it. I mean, I don't think it's thick enough. Can someone resend me the Hanover?
The Hanover, yes.
Reports? I'd like to re-look at those and see how they're.
Okay, and we can, make sure Scott reposts those Hanover reports on the website too, when we get a summary of this board meeting. But I'll send those to you tonight. Cal?
Well, first, thank you for staying so late, especially when you have a 9 o'clock, is that presentation, is that what I heard? So, and I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to surprise anybody, so, because it's the stuff I say all the time. But let me start with some sort of more mundane. You talk about this smorgasbord of choices, and I'm trying to understand the logistics. So if you're saying, look, you have cluster, and I saw that last slide where this is for all, and I did get that. But so if you have this choice of clustering, which addresses performance or addresses some level of need, I suppose, but then you also have the self-contained classrooms. How are you going to change in terms of what's the logistics of deciding who does what and who's going where and what's,
So again,
Goodness,
just like what we talked about, we have parents who were part of the task force that their children were identified and they chose not to receive service. So we offer the choice. So if a parent wants to put their child in a self-contained classroom, they'll go through the plot process and fill out the application. When we have the parent meeting, and we actually have a parent meeting Thursday night, for elementary services, and we have all these parent meetings, and people decide then whether they want the service or not. And if they don't, you still have students, because some students might receive dual service, if you want to call it that, because if it's a teacher that is part of the cluster grouping and there are students in there and gifted students, that child may be getting pull-out, but they also might be receiving cluster service. But then all the students in that classroom are receiving the strategies and the best practices that the teacher was trained on.
Okay.
So it's a buffet.
Okay. So let me, you know, I really like going back to the big picture, and I have to be honest, just full disclosure, this is a tremendously difficult subject for me. I have tremendous issues with this in all kinds of ways. When I say this, I don't mean our program, I mean the entire notion of it. And I'm going to start to fight a series of losing battles. I'm just going to say that right from the front. My sense is we can't do this legally, but I'd like to rename the program. I'd like the word gifted struck from the records.
That's something the task force could look at. That could be something, a task that could be given to the students and let them decide.
Yeah, I have tremendous issues with the word gifted. It imposes a caste system by the very word. And so you start losing the battle from day one. And I don't even understand why whoever created that as the word ever thought that was a good idea. So just, that's my personal bias.
One of the kids actually looked it up. Looked up the person who looked at, and I have to see if I can get that information, because one of the kids wanted to know where it came from a gentleman back in another century, what they came up with.
So I challenge you to find one student who would say, oh, I don't really want to be gifted, I just want to be not, it doesn't make any sense to me. So again, I'm not picking on any of you about this. This is well into our culture. And Debbie, when you started with what does a gifted student look like, I felt myself sort of like arch up, and I just said, that question poses a bias on the whole process. Because if you looked at that whole slide you had, that's what everybody looks like. And so I suppose that was your point, is that you can't tell, gifted, but why do we even ask the question? I mean, and so I, fine, I've philosophized enough. That's my issue with it. So let's back up to what's the whole point, right? So if I'm getting this right, and please just tell me I'm wrong at any point when I'm wrong. The whole point is, how are we going to meet every child's needs in this school district? Is that really the issue here? So you're saying you have a population, and we need to make sure we're serving that population, because some of the ways we've done in the past isn't serving them all the way. Is that an accurate?
We need to be more equitable in how we're servicing not only the gifted kids, but what we're offering to other students.
Right.
They need.
Right. So when I look at there's significant resources suggested here, and again, I know you're saying no added, but again, there's significant resources and many really good ideas. But has the team looked, and maybe this isn't the function of this team, but have you looked at the analog for the rest of the population in terms of what are we offering to the entire population? Now, what I like, one of the things you did is say, here's some things for all. Here's some things we're doing for everybody. But again, there's other things. You're talking about meeting emotional needs. You're talking about meeting social needs. Are we looking at what the analog is for students who aren't identified as gifted, for how are we meeting the needs for that group?
And that's conversations that take place. That's why Bob and I talk. That's why we have ed services. Those are conversations we have on a weekly basis of how we're going to address and support all students in the district.
It's the business we're in, Cal.
I got that. Thank you,
And I
Rob.
think to add to that also, since I've been here, I've heard a lot of criticism about our gifted program and what has happened historically, and was even asked to eliminate the gifted program. And so my response is, we need to evaluate what we're doing and study why we were doing it, and see if we needed to strengthen the program, rather than just for me to make a choice and say we'll eliminate it. So when I had the conversation with Toya, she kind of hesitated and said, oh my gosh, you want me to do what? And I said, let's study. Let's see, why do we have this program? Let's get Hanover Research to come in and assist with us, and then get a task force and bring the recommendation. I mean, I've been enlightened by the studying that you all have done and how versed you are in what's happening with the gifted program. So I think the big picture is that do we stop doing something that we think we're doing wrong, or do we investigate what we're doing and just dig deeper and see why, and then go back and say, is this best for our students? And I think that's what they've done. And they said, yes, there are some things that we've done in the past that may not have been good for all students, but we want to correct that and then extend programs for other students. So
Yeah, I
I
think
think
that's
that is the big picture.
No, I appreciate that. I think that the only issue I would say, and it's, again, not with this team and not with what you've done, just something to consider, is you can't look in a vacuum in terms of how it's helping the students in the program without looking at, is it also in some way pulling from other programs? And I think you've done it, that's where what you've been trying to aim toward. But I think we really need to be really honest with ourselves and look at, there's tremendous pressure surrounding these things. Parental pressure here is huge because we all have gifted kids. Every single one of our kids is gifted in some way. So I think, Bob, when you mentioned the ultimate goal, I think the ultimate goal is beyond what happens in terms of getting them, preparing for the high school or preparing for AP. I said this controversial in one of our previous meetings. I'm not even convinced AP is always the greatest program. I mean, I think that what's the longitudinal outcomes here? What are happening to the kids after they leave us? And how are they prepared for college or the world? And what are we doing to try and look at that? So I'd encourage that too. I'm recognizing that I'm not giving you any positive statements about the program. I do think you're heading the right direction in trying to look at how does this program, how do we look at it in the broad context of our entire student population. But I think, again, I would suggest that we start looking at, okay, here's the set of things we're proposing for this population. What's the set of things we're proposing for all of our populations, and how do we make every one of those populations feel equally valued, no matter where they fall in that spectrum? Because I think sometimes in promoting our individual programs, we're very gung-ho, and we forget that other people who aren't part of that program saying, well, how come I don't get to do that? I mean, shouldn't all of our students be engaged? So I just would encourage
That was an important
that.
conversation that we had, again, because we had a lot of parents that all their students weren't identified. They had to have those conversations in their homes with their own children and looking at what's best.
Right.
And I've gotten emails, I've gotten petitions, I've had meetings, I've had people come in and talk to me, and I made sure that I shared and addressed that information with the task force, whether it made, there were some uncomfortable conversations. There were people that were upset and crying. But at the end of the day, we are looking at what we can try to do to help and assist everybody, and with that training, I believe that's opening up the opportunities for people to offer those best practices to all students.
And I think sometimes what you don't see when you see the presentation or all the plans or all that is, being the person in Canterbury doing the job, I devote so much of my time to the students who I don't teach, working with their teachers and working with them, and you know what I mean? Like, so that's that's not absent just because right now we're talking about X, Y, or Z.
And I'm glad you're a great straight person for this one, because that sure didn't come out well.
I don't know what to say, but that's okay.
Because I guess maybe that's part of what I'm looking for, is that we give presentations on gifted. And instead of giving a presentation on what is it we're trying to do for our entire population, and gifted being a part of that, and showing where it fits in this giant puzzle, and how even though you're seen in this room at this presentation as a resource for gifted students, you just said, you're a resource for all students. And I think that that's an important distinction that we sometimes miss in when we're presenting. So one final really weird off the wall thing. So if the notion is also that our gifted population has certain needs that other parts of the population may or may not have, and given the new requirements where as long as there's the 30 hours of exposure, if you will, to a certified gifted educator, is the ultimate goal, if we're trying to increase enrollment in enrichment classes, if you take that out to its ultimate limit of 100% participation, are we trying to get 100% of our staff to be gifted trained?
Good question.
Yeah, good question. We'll have to
Because
ponder that
then,
one.
wouldn't
I
that
think
mean
we're
that
just
every
trying
single
to-
classroom has someone who knows what to do with every student? I mean, and I just fell into my own trap. So the student, you want every teacher not only gifted trained, but trained for all these other eventualities.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm asking a lot, but I mean, but that's the gig, right? So, yeah, so I just throw that out.
Well, when I look at choices for all, I think that is embedded there, because when you talk about the primary education for K to 2, everybody's going to get that, whether you're gifted or not. So it's going to be embedded in that classroom. The same thing when we talk about clustering. In that cluster grouping, everybody's getting the same instruction. So again, we're not pulling kids out, we're including more students. I think it's more inclusive. I think everything up there is more inclusive. Honors, you don't have to be gifted to get honors classes, but we can count those services if we have the training. So all win. So again, gifted is not better, it's just different. So I think offering this wide range of services is going to benefit all of our students.
So Choices for All is another program?
That's
You
right,
didn't-
I coined that. I shouldn't.
That's the banner.
I mean, but you're talking about these, excuse me, Cal.
No, you're done, I'm done.
You talked about these 6 things that we
Oh,
did.
no, I shouldn't have said anything. What you?
No, well, I'm probably gonna jump on Cal's bandwagon.
No, it's
Yeah.
good, though. It's good.
It seems that Cal is right. Every child is
Hold on.
gifted.
Could you say that again?
So every child,
Child has gifts. That's a difference.
well,
And there's that
yeah,
title
yeah,
again.
the gifted, we got, Jim already established that we had a problem with the test because some of our kids come to the test with their allergies acting up. And we know that's why they don't test gifted.
But the beauty of it is now, because we offer multiple ways of assessment, just that one day won't pass them by, they get other opportunities.
Well, we hope that's right. We really do hope that's right. And I was looking at this PETS. PETS says, and I guess we get to the point that we figure out how to deal with all the kids, and that's the business we're in. But all of the children go through something related to pets. I think they all get tested or all get some introduction to it or something like that.
No, this will just, they'll all get,
Huh?
the teacher will come visit.
It says all students in
Yeah,
these
all
You
grades.
say when you get to that, yes, they just say.
Yeah, when pets actually
Yes.
says,
Right,
all the
yes.
students
When we
get,
get to-
all the
everybody.
students, when we do this, all
When
the
we do this,
students
yeah.
are gonna be exposed
Yes.
to
kinds of things.
our
Yes.
thinking
Yes.
around what we want to give
Correct.
to the gifted kids.
Correct,
Yes.
when we get to that point.
I think that's probably the push that we're making. That it is about every child. It is about every gifted child, all 5,000 gifted children that we have in this district.
I think Toya might smack me for saying this, and I can take it. I think it's really important, yes, what you're saying, I get it. Every child has unique needs. Every child has talents, and every child has things that they need support and assistance with. Absolutely. But I think we have to be a little bit careful here not to lump all of the kids that are at that 95th and higher percentile. They do have some unique needs that are different than the needs of some other populations. And trends that we tend to notice with students, just the same way a student who is at the 5th percentile or lower has some very specific, very unique needs that not everybody else needs.
Right.
So yes, choices for all, support for students to expose them to this great kind of teaching, absolutely. But let's not throw everything into one big category.
I don't want to do that, but I want to make sure that we're hearing what's going on. And what I think is going on is that as we talk about gifted is one piece that, to some extent, and going back to Jim and the child with the allergies on the day of the test, Jim's saying that this is another imposition that the state has made on our district and other districts. So we're seeing that expanded. One of the things that the board always has to try to figure out is what do we advocate for and how we advocate for it, which means that we want to know as much as we can about this whole thing. I mean, gifted is one aspect of it, but there's other things that happen too, like the graduation stuff that came into being for the class of 2018. Well, we want to know a lot more about that, and I think we have to always challenge ourselves. You know, you have to challenge yourself with all these 5,000 kids that show up, but we have to challenge ourselves to make sure that the state is not imposing things that hamper our ability to bring out those gifts. And part of this is Cal's point, that we are complicit to some extent in lifting up some children. We think we could be, because the state has mandated it, that we might be complicit in ignoring some of our other children. So that's a conversation,
I get it.
in my opinion.
Choice for all.
Choice
Choice for all. I think that's right. Beverly, did you have 3 or 4 questions?
No,
No?
no.
Well, I got a couple.
But I do appreciate you clarifying that contract, because that was kind of troubling me, that you clarified that
That
for
was
us.
back after,
Back in the day.
the
Yes.
operating standard specifically stated high ability
Back in the day.
students, yeah.
My question is this, and it's not well-formed, but I'll throw it out there. We have invested some energy into International Baccalaureate, and we haven't had any conversation, any mention, or any discussion whatsoever about the IB schools or process or whatever as it relates to giftedness or gifted. So I don't know, what does it?
Research says the IB is good for gifted.
Yes, IB is one of the strategies that is used for gifted. And we have had those conversations with the specific schools, with Melissa Garkar and the IB coordinators. There were some concerns from parents saying that gifted was hampering IB, and that wasn't the case at all. Because when they came in to do the IB certification, especially because we had self-contained embedded and it was part of the school, IB said there were no issues. The gifted teachers last year traveled to a meeting in Columbus and Bexley for a IB gifted conversation, and we were doing well compared to the other districts. So we don't have any issues with IB and gifted here, right now.
Okay, we might just at some point let us know how they're integrated or not.
Yes, we will.
Anything else? Well, you guys did good, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And it's almost 10 o'clock, too. Is there anything else?
I have a question.
Sure.
The upcoming meetings, we had a meeting next week on Wednesday to discuss the middle schools. Why isn't that on the upcoming meetings?
It's canceled. We have a new date. I'll send it out to you tomorrow.
Oh, okay, why was it canceled? When is-
Oh, we wanted more time,
Oh, when's it gonna be now?
June 27th, I believe.
Well, my only concern is the more we delay, the more we have either a yes or no, we have less wiggle room or
Well-
opportunity to discuss.
Well, the reason we delayed, Eric, is because there was some confusion about the purpose of the meeting and what the board was going to do at the meeting, and we wanted to make sure we had enough time to get the right communication out to the stakeholders about what was going to happen at that meeting, so that everyone was prepared. We decided to go with the June date, and that would give some other partners the opportunity to get those things together as well. And for us to structure what the participation and the community engagement that we need before any decision is made.
Well, I guess my question is, if we're bumping it back to another month, then when do we have to make a decision?
September.
What's the date again?
I think it's June 27th. Is that the right date? June 27th. It's going to be a,
And the topic is middle school facilities,
correct.
right? Just so everybody,
It's a master facilities plan. We're going to look at it as a whole, not just the middle school, but the entire plan.
elementary schools too?
We decided that we need to look at the entire plan. Just remember the plan that we are working from was in 2013, and there's a lot that has changed since then. So instead of just looking at it through that middle school lens, we decided it would be best to look at the plan in its entirety. Because some other things would be impacted if we move with another decision. We understand that some other things are going to could be impacted, and we wanted to discuss them openly so that people wouldn't come with rumors of things that they thought were going to happen. Just for example, I received several emails tonight that we were going to vote on closing Fairfax. So we had to send a communication out tonight to inform people that we were not voting tonight to close Fairfax. I don't know where that came from. So we just thought it would be best to have a discussion openly with the community about the master facilities plan that we know is done in 2013. They good?
Anything else?
Whole lot of things I want to say about that, but I think we need to notice it, we need to get the right people in the room.
Correct.
We need to hear what's happening
There you
from the
go.
administration, so let's,
Right.
it's a great conversation to have,
Thank you.
so.
Okay.
Okay.
If there is nothing else, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Gainer?
Mr. Bosch,
Yes.
Mr. Registrar,
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan,
Yes.
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker.
Yes.